Hi, today we're going to make a multigrain bread, and I haven't done one of these yet. Looking forward to it. We've gone through a lot of the different white breads, some rye, whole wheats, and then using different pre-ferments, and then a lot of just lecture as well. And what I wanted to do with this is, again, it's just a very strong, very good tasting multigrain bread that you can do with multiple options of seeds and even flour combinations and pre-ferments. What we're going to do today is going to be, let's see, I've got quinoa, both the red and white. I've got some millet and some buckwheat in here. Just happened to be a beautiful mix that I found at a store, so I thought I would just get it together. Toasted pumpkin seeds, which if you get seeds, pumpkin seeds, sunflower seeds, sesame seeds, if you do any of those, toast them, okay? Just put it in the oven, sheet pan, lay it out, watch it because they will burn quickly. And what you're gonna do is really, really get a good deep flavor. Same thing with like nuts and things. So I toasted these pumpkin seeds, which they bring out that vibrancy of what the flavor is. And that didn't take more than maybe 2 minutes. And then when you take it out, put it on a cooler sheet pan to cool them down quicker so that they don't continue to roast. So we toasted these up. This on the quinoa and the millet buckwheat, I had to wash it, rinse it. There's a kind of this waxy substance that's on quinoa. It's called saponin. They say there's a slight toxicity to it. It's not necessarily harmful to us, but it kind of keeps bugs away and things. So what you want to do is just wash this kind of soapiness off, and it takes, 2, 3, 4 times to go through it, and that's all good. And then just strain it all the way. You don't really have to continue to do a soaker and then let them absorb the water. But what we will do with this is I've got a 75, 15, 10, 75 white flour, 15 whole wheat, and then 10% of a dark rye. Of course, salt, and I'm going to put in a little bit of honey. And normally, I would put in about 5%. That's enough to make it a little bit of a, instead of having that incredibly earthy flavor from all of the flowers and the seeds and such, it just kind of gives it a little bit of sweetness or a little bit of kind of brushing off of that harshness. I'm just going to go with about 3% today, but I can go up to 5. You can even go up to 10, but that makes it kind of that more dense, chewy feel bread. I don't want that. This is going to have a tighter cell structure overall, just from the density from the seeds as well as the flour combination. We're going to use a liquid wheat levain, and then overall hydration. I don't want to guess exactly, but it's in the 70s. I'd have to do my math again real quick, but it's in the 70s, and I push it beyond it for both the flour. And then the seeds is the amount of water that's going to be soaked up by the seeds. So you have to do a little bit of compensation for what you think the dough would want, just plain, then add that additional water that you might have from the absorption of the seeds. If you don't go through that, do a soaker. Okay, so you can do this and soak them overnight, as I mentioned, but it's not necessary. I just add a little bit extra water to compensate. So let's begin. And we're doing, again, about 3.5 kilos of dough with the white, whole wheat, and rye. Okay. Pre-scaled the water as well. And the reason I'm putting this on directly into the scale is that honey is kind of a very sticky, right, to deal with. So instead of putting it in a bowl and then having to deal with afterwards, if your scale can do this, just do what I'm doing because it makes it a lot easier. So I'm just going to put in about 40 grams right now. And rather than have to go through washing, dealing with the amount of honey, and then what you don't get out of the bowl, just go directly in. A lot easier. It's, same with like when we go with the levain. Okay. And here, same thing. I need 337 grams. It's about 25% for the levain. It's the same levain we've been using in most of the videos. As I mentioned, this is my go-to flavor profile. That doesn't mean that you have to, but what it does mean is that you don't have to hold or feed as many, cultures throughout the process. If I go with a rye bread, I make a rye culture. If I go with a multigrain, I use the wheat levain. If I even go with most white breads, I still use a wheat levain, right? So we're going to begin mixing this without the seeds, all right? So we first start this and as we've gone through on every mix with these KitchenAids and back home, I go with a low, slow mix in the beginning. And most of the developments is going to come from folds in the bulk fermentation. Okay, so what we're going to do is bring this to a dough, okay, an incorporation stage, get it developed just slightly. Then I'm going to stop the mixer, add the seeds, and then we're going to continue to mix just to blend the seeds in. The seeds are going to be added later for the reason that they inhibit the development of the gluten. So if you do put them in the beginning, you're just kind of shredding up that gluten as you're mixing. So put all the large, particulate type items, those get folded in or just kind of slowly incorporated in at the end of the mix. It's about 7 minutes or so here. And then we're going to go through, add the seeds, and then we'll go up. Okay, so as I mentioned, the dough is going to mix low speed for about 7 minutes, which is what it's been doing. And it's going to be a much more loose, higher hydration dough because once I add these, incorporate it, and then even during the bulk phase, it's going to continue to absorb that water from the dough. So if you look at this, this is going to look quite loose. Okay, so now granted, you can make your dough and continue to fold it, and you can make a great dough just as is, all right? And you can work on that open cell structure everybody's after. But what you want to do with this as a multigrain is take this, incorporate the seeds, okay? When you do this and you start adding it, you're going to have to take it off the mixer and kind of scrape down the sides, bring it back in, because you want to make sure that you get it fully incorporated through the dough, all right? And so it's going to take a few more minutes of mix, and it's not about a development now. It's strictly about incorporating it. All right, so we'll put this back on the mixer. Lowest speed you get, okay? Put it on, mix it. This may take a couple of minutes, 2-3 minutes, because it is going to take just a lot to kind of make sure that you get it homogeneous throughout. So be patient, give it a couple folds with your hand or the scraper, then continue to mix it. And then when it's done, then we'll go into our bulk phase. Okay, so it's incorporated. And as I mentioned, when you look at it, the seeds and the bulk of it is going to start to absorb the water. Not immediately, I mean, it's going to take some time, but you can see just the density now coming. It's still going to be I'm not going to say an open crumb. This is going to be a tighter crumb, but it's not going to be like heavy, okay? You'll actually enjoy this very, very much. And so we're going to bulk ferment this about 2 to 2.5 hours, okay? And as I mentioned, if you really needed to kind of shorten your time frame a little bit, instead of doing it as a straight, naturally leavened item, you can just put in a small percentage of instant yeast, right? Dry active. And like, let's say you just put in 0.1% or maybe like 10, those little packets that you get at the store, generally about 10 grams, that should be more than enough. And instead of it being, 2.5 hours and another 2.5 hours to proof, you may be able to reduce that time without really changing the flavor too much, a little bit, but not too much. But also the texture is going to be a little bit lighter because you're not going to have nearly as much acidity. So here we are just kind of putting this together. We're going to give this most definitely a fold, if not 2 folds, throughout the bulk time. And this bulk time is going to be, again, depending on my dough temp, probably 2 hours. Okay, it's pretty hot here in Tampa right now. I know it's coming on Christmas, but it was about 80 degrees here today, so my house is about the same temperature. And we're looking at 81 degrees. So I would have preferred it to be a little bit cooler. If you need to chill down your water to do so, do it. But the bulk time is going to be as it is. So normally I'd be looking between 75 to 78 degrees. It's not a huge difference that it's 81, but I can definitely look at it and say that it's going to be moving a little bit faster. So do the same when you do these breads. Think about what you're doing as you do it, and don't go strictly by what the guidelines say. Feel it, get an understanding of it. Okay, so we've been, it's about a 2-hour, 15-minute bulk time right now. And as I mentioned, the dough temperature was running warmer than I normally do, and you can see how much more gassy and lively this is now. So I'm going to divide this. We'll see how the dough strength is, and then dictate how we pre-shape it. Again, every time we do any dough, until you've done it more than a couple times, you can't count exactly of what's going to happen. So get used to and reacting to what it is that dough can do. And just get a feel for this stuff. It's really not that hard. And the more practice you do, the better you get, of course. And there are different techniques of things, but for the most part, the dough making process is consistent across most varieties of bread. Okay, there's differences with rich breads, laminated breads, things of that nature. But lean dough breads, they're good. Okay, so you can see how this is getting very nice and light. And considering how many seeds are in here, and then, the flour combination, it's got 75% white flour, so it does have a good chance for a little bit lighter dough. But there's been so many mistakes made in bread that's manufactured that is multigrain, to where it's just a big, heavy, dense piece. And I don't like it. You will like this, I'm sure of it. So these are going to be 875 grams each, 4 pieces. I'm going to pre-shape, and then I'm going to be shaping these into batard. There we go. And this should weigh the same, which it does. If you scaled right, divide your dough total, obviously would be the same. Okay, so your scraper, again, is your best friend doing this. And I'm going to give it a tight pre-shape. All right, for all of these, just like this. And we will come back and fully shape. All right, so we'll give it about a 15-minute rest time in between. All right, so we're just going to make some batard out of this. And All right, so just that. All right, and I'm going to make the rest of these just like that. It's a little bit sticky underneath, so I don't really need a whole lot, but just a little bit of flour here. And this will probably be about an hour and a half, possibly 2 hours in proof time. All right? Okay, so we have our breads very proofed. You see how much larger they have grown. They're very, very soft to the touch, and you can see it when you do give a slight indentation. It comes up slowly and then leaves that slight little indentation and fingerprint. This one is going to be a little bit wider because the length of my couche didn't have a full, wrap around, but the other is going to be a little bit tighter. So you'll see that being maybe a little bit wider, flatter altogether. So I can only load 2 at a time, and you got to be gentle and careful when you're trying to release these when you only have a certain amount of space on the couche as such. So just very gently. Lay that over. Give it a little bit better shape than it had. And I'm going to put flour on top, and I like using a sifter to do it. It's a little bit more even. You can do it like this, of course, but this is just going to be a little bit more even altogether. And the reason that on most of these darker breads that there's any flour dusting at all is because the overall bread, it's going to be brown, right? Most people don't really appreciate that kind of dark brown color, so they'll go with something like this, and that way it kind of covers it up a little bit, and so it's not as much. I'm going to go with 4 kind of short scores on this. It's just what I choose. You can do whatever you want. I would not suggest cutting it long lengthwise. Okay, it's going to make it lower and flatter. So something more of a cross. It's going to help it raise it up and then split open like this. All right. So, like such. All right, and one more loaf on. I always try to go and get this in there relatively fast, because the longer that first loaf is in while the oven is yet to be steamed, the more dull that loaf becomes. So, all right, we want to get that steam going. All right, so again, the crushed ice. Got the cast iron skillet with those lava rocks in there. Gets it a nice big heavy steam. You want that so that the crust can form properly. Try to get that door closed as quickly as possible. We're baking at 475, at least on my oven, and it could be a different setting for yours. But I'm probably looking at about 35 minutes total on this bake. Okay, so we had a chance to bake off the rest of the multigrain. As you remember, this had 75% white flour, 15% wheat, and another 10% dark rye. And then basically on top of that, it was a little over 20% of the dough weight on top was going to be seeds. So in other words, it was about 2.8 kilo of dough and 680 or so grams of seeds. So in other words, you can anywhere from about 10% on the low side to maybe 25% on the high side, in addition to the dough, would be a good amount of seeds. You don't want to get too much, because then it just becomes so it's not bread anymore. It's just a big bunch of seeds. But if you look at it, it's got great color, really, really good flavor. Toast your seeds for the seeds that are necessary to toast, something like, you know, the pumpkin seeds, sunflower, sesame, those types. If you need to do a soaker on some that are just going to be very, very hard and dense, or just add an additional amount of water to the dough and then let it soak up as you are. So as you'll see on the crumb with this, this is going to have a very rich flavor to it and a very rich piece to it. And so you'll have, you know, a good mouthfeel, a good texture, and an overall good taste with this. It's excellent with some sliced meats. And actually, tuna is one of my favorites with this. And just overall, you'll enjoy it. It's a healthier side of a bread, and but it's still not something that your kids wouldn't eat either. Like this will be for lunch for one of my sons tomorrow. So enjoy. Check out the videos, the rest of them. This is, I think, 18 or 19 in this series. I'm not sure how many now. And each of them is a step in a progression to where you can actually learn what's going on and why we're talking about what we're talking about. So if you need a question about the levain, go back to when we were making starters. If you have a question about formulas, you can go back to the videos on formulas, different pre-ferments, all that. I hope you enjoy that, and if you do, subscribe to the channel. If also that you like it and all the rest of the things that can go along with that. We're at kingdombread-tampa on YouTube, as well as our family's website, kingdombread-tampa.com. All right, thank you.